Ladies and gentlemen, the next session will begin in 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The next session will begin in 2 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This GlobSec 2022 is already in full swing with many, many sessions taking place, not just in this room, but obviously parallel as well. We have a very interesting one coming up here with the foreign ministers of Austria, Slovakia, and virtually Ukraine in just a moment. But before we kick off this very pertinent session titled War in Ukraine, Europe's Destiny at Stakes, ? First up, I'm delighted for an input, if you will, leading up to the then subsequent conversation, a keynote given by the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See. And he's here with us, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Paul Gallagher.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Thankful for the invitation to the GlobSec Forum, I am pleased to share with you a reflection on the meaning of solidarity and the wave of solidarity we are observing in Europe in response to the war in Ukraine, particularly in its neighbouring countries since the 24th of February. My thoughts are partly inspired by my recent journey to Ukraine, which allowed me to feel the suffering of the people and touch the serious consequences of the war, especially during my encounter with internally displaced persons and visiting the places near Kiev most affected by the conflict. I ask, what is solidarity? Although a precise definition of solidarity does not exist, most of us would agree, in experience, that it is an attitude of attachment, of belonging to others, or of having a common interest. It is the opposite of competition and is characterized instead by mutual support and fraternity. Solidarity highlights in a particular way the intrinsic social nature of the human person. Non nobis solum nati sumus. We are not born for us alone, stated Cicero, referring to Plato. Solidarity is manifested in helping and advocating for others, especially in situations of weakness and suffering. Advocating for others assumes and includes the recognition of the equality of all in dignity and rights, especially the equal status of the victim of injustice. A bond exists between solidarity and equality among men and peoples, between solidarity and peace in the world. As Pope Francis emphasized, the word solidarity is a little worn and at times poorly understood, but it refers to something more than a few sporadic acts of generosity. It presumes the creation of a new mindset which thinks in terms of community and the priority of the life of all over the appropriation of goods by a few, end of quotation. Another important aspect of solidarity is justice, recognizing the equal dignity and the equal rights of all human beings implies advocating for those rights, and not only as a duty, but also as a question of justice. Nevertheless, justice is merely a preparatory stage. As St. Paul VI said, it is the minimum measure of charity. The idea of solidarity, which begins with an acknowledgement of the equal value of the other, goes beyond justice and comes to fulfillment only when I willingly place my life at the service of the other. True solidarity, therefore, is not limited to empathy, to individual acts of support, or to the restoration of rights, but includes the willingness to share in the other's pain, to take, in a certain sense, some of their burden upon oneself. In other words, there is no true solidarity without our willingness to share the burden of suffering that evil inflicts, and in some way, without helping to pay for it. In the end, true solidarity has a price, and it can be painful. Therefore, the social doctrine of the Catholic Church considers solidarity a virtue found in a commitment to the good of one's neighbour with the readiness, in the gospel sense, to lose oneself for the sake of the other instead of exploiting him, and to serve him instead of oppressing him for one's own advantage. For Christians, solidarity is also informed by faith, as we believe that God himself showed solidarity with humanity when he sent his Son Jesus Christ to earth, where he shared the fate of fallen humanity unto death. His passion and resurrection showed us that solidarity is the only answer to the prevalence of evil, sin, and ultimately death. War in Ukraine, a call for global solidarity. We are all following the concerning and disheartening evolution of the war in Ukraine. Faced with Russia's aggression against Ukraine, Pope Francis, together with the Church and countless people in the world, suffers greatly from the many deaths, violence of all sorts, the devastation of cities and infrastructures, the separation of so many families, and the millions of displaced people and refugees. The Catholic Church is convinced that war is a scourge and is never an appropriate way to resolve problems that arise between nations. It has never been, and it never will be, because it creates new and still more complicated conflicts. When it erupts, war becomes an unnecessary massacre, an adventure without return that compromises humanity's present and threatens its future. The Pope has been as forceful as he can to defend the Ukrainian people, to point out the fact that they have their freedom, that the integrity of this country has been transgressed. As he has said, we must renew our commitment to resolve the conflict through diplomatic and political dialogues and reject the logic of war, which is always a defeat for humanity. While we lament the limitation of our human attempts to find immediate ways to end this ceaseless conflict and experience helplessness in the face of the refusal of dialogue, we must recognize that the war in Ukraine has triggered a global wave of solidarity and support for the Ukrainian people. Close to 6 million people are being hosted primarily by European neighboring countries, which continue to provide them with necessary humanitarian aid and financial assistance. Another 8 million people are internally displaced and currently assisted by the international community, including UNHCR, ICRC, and the local church. Faith-based organizations like Caritas and the Sovereign Order of Malta are working closely with governments not only to provide material aid, but also to answer the spiritual needs of those they serve. Although the help provided in some cases may appear to be a mere drop in the vast ocean of need, the solidarity we are witnessing in this global response is an encouraging sign. As Pope Francis said, these numerous acts of charity become a blessing for our societies, at times debased by selfishness and individualism, and help to make them welcoming to all. The strength of solidarity. At first glance, solidarity as outlined above may appear as a secondary or even a partial response to the grave situation we are facing in war-torn Ukraine, since it cannot prevent and will not end the war. Even so, we have also seen that a concrete act of solidarity might involve supporting the legitimate self-defense capacity of Ukraine within the framework of international law. Indeed, solidarity in the comprehensive sense, goes far beyond stopgap or short-term responses, including humanitarian aid and other creative initiatives. The global solidarity we have seen in Ukraine will deeply form from their people's history and memory. As Pope Francis noted, solidarity, understood in its most profound meaning, is a way of making history. During my recent visit to Ukraine, both the Catholic bishops and the central and local civil authorities continue to confirm how important it is for the population to feel the closeness of the international community and to receive the support they need to pursue peace and meaningful coexistence. Weapons never lead to peace, nor does the logic of nuclear deterrence. Solidarity, however, is a privileged path towards peace because it creates bonds of friendship and cooperation among peoples and states that look beyond mere economic dependence or counterbalancing security threats. It seeks unity in the common good. Furthermore, responding in solidarity to the war in Ukraine will strengthen the international institutions as they confront a crucial moment in their history. In fact, as Pope Francis emphasized in his message for the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we are faced with a choice between two possible paths. One path leads to the consolidation of multilateralism as the expression of a renewed sense of global co-responsibility, a solidarity grounded in justice and the attainment of peace and unity within the human family, which is God's plan for our world. The other path emphasizes self-sufficiency, nationalism, protectionism, individualism, and isolation. Peace is inconceivable without solidarity. It is imperative to recognize that interdependence in itself demands the abandonment of the politics of blocs, the sacrifice of all forms of economic, military, or political imperialism, and transformation of mutual distrust into collaboration. This is precisely the act proper to solidarity among individuals and nations. 1 year ago, Pope Francis addressed the GlobSec Forum in a video message, emphasizing every way of acting calls for a vision, a global vision of hope like that of the biblical prophet Isaiah, who saw swords turned into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks. The world can emerge better from this crisis only by proving that solidarity is the strongest answer that humanity can provide when faced with the evils of war. And I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for those words. I was struck in particular by what you said about sharing the burden of suffering, sharing the burden of pain. That's something that we're certainly going to be discussing in this panel right now. I'm Justin Vogt. I'm Executive Editor of Foreign Affairs. Thank you all for being here. It's a great conference in a great city. We've got a great panel. And I'd like to introduce you to the members of that panel now and welcome them, two of them, to the stage. A third will be joining us via Zoom. First, we have Mr. Ivan Korčok, who is the foreign minister of our host nation, the Slovak Republic. We also have Mr. Alexander Schallenberg, who is the Austrian Minister for European and International Affairs. And joining us via Zoom is the Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Dmytro. Now, before we begin, Mr. Senek's boss, the Foreign Minister of Ukraine, Mr. Dmytro Kuleba, has prepared a short video address that we'd like to share with you. We thought it would be a good way to open up our discussion.
Dear participants, friends, I regret I cannot be with you in Bratislava today, but I thank the organizers for the opportunity to address you. First of all, let me express how deeply we in Ukraine are grateful to Slovakia. Slovaks have stood by us resolutely since the very first days of the invasion. We will always remember this, and I also thank my counterpart, Ivan Korčok, for his personal engagement and commitment. This Friday, 100 days since Russia launched its unprovoked and unjustified war of aggression against Ukraine. 100 days of Russian horror, destruction, murder, looting, and rape. But also 100 days of heroism, bravery, and humanity of Ukrainians. 100 days of solidarity and support of our friends and partners around the globe. Despite all odds, and with your consistent support, Ukraine still stands both feet on the ground. At a very high cost, we have won a number of important battles. The war is now raging in the south of Ukraine and in the east, where combat is especially bloody and difficult. Hundreds of thousands of brave Ukrainians are fighting the Russian army, but we need to equip them properly to outgun Russia's enormous advantage in artillery. This is why we urgently need more NATO-style heavy weapons for our military to push the Russians back, especially the 155th caliber. And I take this opportunity to call on partners to deliver additional material as soon as possible. As a foreign minister, I would prefer to talk about diplomacy, not guns. Unfortunately, Russia leaves me no such choice. Ukraine has proposed diplomatic solutions numerous times, before the invasion and after it has already started. Russia has consistently rejected any diplomacy and prioritized war only. Today, they remain squarely focused on seeking military solutions. The only way to force Russia to return to the negotiating table is to defeat it on the battleground. It must become clear to Putin that he will not be able to reach a military solution in Ukraine. As the war drags on for its 4th month, there is a discussion in the West on what our war aims should be. First of all, I want to make clear that it is Ukraine and the people of Ukraine who will define this war's aims. We are fighting a just defensive war against invaders who came to our land to literally annihilate us, deprive us of our identity and our right to exist. Russia's genocidal intent has become apparent after massacres in Bucha, Borodyanka, Irpin, Mariupol, and many other towns and villages. This is why we fight not for political or economic purposes, but for the right of our people to live and to be Ukrainians. We will do so as long as it takes to survive and prevail. We call on our allies and partners to drop ambiguous language and set goals straight. It is true that Russia must not win and Ukraine must not lose. But why don't we set a positive and clear goal in 3 words? Ukraine must win. When we all set this goal clearly, ways to achieve it will become much clearer too. Dear friends, with the war entering a longer phase, we hear voices proposing unrealistic ways out of this war. Cede territories or make other painful concessions that, in their view, would pacify Putin. Suggestions like these are ill-advised and invite more war, not pave the way to peace. We have followed this path from 2014 to 2022. It has only brought us to a new catastrophe. Russia wants to physically destroy Ukraine and kill as many Ukrainians as possible. Given such a choice, the only way out is to force Putin into failure. Do not worry about his face. He has enough tools at his disposal to save it. His propaganda within Russia can literally direct public opinion in any direction. And he does not need real facts for this. Should he order to withdraw his forces, he will easily explain it to the Russians. They will be told that the Russian army has fulfilled all tasks of demilitarization and denazification, whatever it means for Russia, by destroying this and that quantity of Ukrainian units, vehicles, facilities, and so on. The whole idea that Putin is cornered and has no way out is a self-imposed illusion. On the contrary, Ukraine can and must win peace for itself and for the entire Europe. Ukraine's victory will be our shared victory. It will ensure generations of Europeans can live in freedom, peace, and stable development. Instead of suggesting how to save Putin's face or feed him more Ukraine's territories and lives, we should all focus on ways to push Russia back. We feel the support and solidarity of our partners, and we are deeply grateful for it. These are weapons, macro-financial assistance, funds for rebuilding our infrastructure, hospitality towards our refugees, and many other signs of global support. We urge you to continue it as long as it is necessary for Ukraine to prevail. We didn't ask Putin to go all in. It was his own choice, which he must pay for. Ukraine never wanted this war, but we will be the ones to end it. Sooner rather than later, and at a lower cost, if we receive all the necessary assistance on time, Ukraine will be a verdict to Putin's regime. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you a productive discussion today.
All right. Well, we'll thank him in absentia for an excellent speech and an excellent presentation. If there's one thing that that audiences like this one have gotten used to in the past few months, it is terrific messaging from the Ukrainians, and Foreign Minister Kuleba is no slouch in that department. That is your boss, I think, Deputy Foreign Minister. And as clear as his message was, some of these ideas really deserve some scrutiny, and we want to try to understand better. So I want to start our panel today by asking you a very simple question. The foreign minister said essentially, don't worry about Putin losing face. He can sell anything as a victory owing to his propaganda machine. Let me ask you this for your thoughts on this. If that's the case, why has he not done so already?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I also would like to thank the organizers for this important panel. Let me start by saying that when we speak about future, we imagine our future, by we I mean Europe. It looks like we imagine it differently from Russia. Last year, we spoke about green future. What we see now is that Russia is trying to drag us to the dark past. Speaking of saving someone's face, firstly, I think that on every front, be it informational, be it by informational, I mean propaganda in Russia, be it military or any other, I think that Russia has already lost. It lost its reputation, it lost its ranking #2 military in the world, it lost the trust from the civilized community. However, of course, as soon as the war is over, it will definitely discover more and more atrocities that Russian armed forces made in Ukraine. And we are talking about scorched earth. We are talking about thousands, tens of thousands killed civilians, ruined infrastructure, hospitals, roads, schools, universities. So I believe that when we speak about losing face or saving face, I think that we need to first think about saving Ukraine. And the sooner and we do it, I think it will help the entire Europe.
Fair enough.
To strengthen itself.
Fair enough. Minister Schallenberg, one of the ways in which Ukraine has asked Europe for help, Europe is it would like to join the EU. Can you explain your government's position on that question?
Absolutely. I mean, we believe that. Does it work actually? No. Micro?
You're coming through now, I think.
Okay. Now, absolutely. We believe that we have to send a very clear sign. Ukraine is part of the European family. Ukraine has to be clearly anchored within the European Union. The only thing is, we cannot stop at the symbolism. Just giving an etiquette won't send the right message. What we are thinking about is, and secondly, we have to be aware that the eyes of Moscow might not only lie on Ukraine. We have Moldova, we have the Southern Caucasus, and we have, for Austria, very important, and for the European Union, the Western Balkans. So our position is, let's make a big bang, so to say, and send a very clear message that these countries, these regions are part of the Western world, of the free world, and that we want to put the money where our mouth is, and not only give an etiquette, but we have to think harder, because the the templates we had in the past. Full accession, association agreement, or the economic area is not sufficient, because look at the Western Balkans. We have promised them 19 years ago in Thessaloniki to join, and by now frustration is growing. We have already surveys in some countries in the Western Balkans where it seems that Russia is more popular than the European Union. In Republika Srpska, Vladimir Putin is the most popular politician. That should ring an alarm bell in Brussels. And I think we should not repeat the same mistake now in the East. We should think twice, and that's why we proposed in the last couple of days a couple of ideas how to put, meat on the bones of talking to have Ukraine and other countries being part of our family.
Okay, but you mentioned a clear message. So in the interest of a clear message, the answer is Austria supports EU membership for Ukraine?
I believe that this should be the clear signal of the European Council, but we have to be aware that there are no fast tracks, there's no shortcut, and we should not forget about other regions, and we should think twice, because simply having this etiquette does not send the right signal.
Okay. Mr. Minister Korčok, recently the big news, well, there's always big news these days, every day there's big news, but one of the pieces of big news recently was the agreement on banning Russian oil, the embargo of Russian oil via tanker, but not via pipeline. Slovakia was granted some exemptions from the EU ban on importing Russian oil. I'd like to know, how does the Slovak government reconcile its clear and strong opposition to Russia's war with the continued purchase of Russian oil, purchases that directly fund Russia's war?
I'll respond that in a second, but I cannot but start by saying how important and moving it is for us Slovaks when we hear so many speaking with that level of recognition regarding Slovak support and solidarity with Ukraine. It means a lot. We've heard that from President Zelensky in his moving address this morning. We've heard it from President von der Leyen. We've heard it from Dmytro. It is important because I want to remind the audience that Slovakia ranks 8th globally measured to GDP when it comes to the assistance and actually assistance to Ukraine. So I want to thank you for that feedback. Can I comment on what my friend said?
Yes, please.
Because he not only is a good neighbor, but he's my friend. And I thank you, Alexander, for joining me for this debate. I agree entirely with you when you say that it cannot, when it comes to Ukraine's future in the European Union and granting candidate status, it cannot end with symbolism. I agree with you. Nevertheless, this symbolism at this moment, through granting candidate status, matters a lot, and we should not further delay the decision on it, because President Zelensky said it this morning. Our moral hinges on your moral, and I think this is exactly what Ukrainian nation needs, what the fighters for the very existence of their nation needs, a clear commitment and evidence that we count with them one day becoming member of European Union. But you cannot do that without the first symbolic step, if you want, and that's granting the candidate status. I agree with you entirely with Ursula von der Leyen. It's not about wild card giving them. It's not about fast tracking. It's not about shortcuts. But this is the moment to agree on candidate status for Ukraine. Just in the second question, how Slovakia reconciles what the fact that we keep on receiving Russian oil with the very clear support that Slovakia has been providing to Ukraine. I mean, we've agreed to the 6th package. As a matter of fact, at the end of this year, I think it will be 90% of oil deliveries from Russia that will cease to be brought to Europe. And it is reality for Slovakia and to other countries in Central Europe that we needed more time as a transition to the moment where we completely decouple from that. And I'm very glad.
Do you feel confident you'll be able to make up the shortfall in that in a year?
Yes, we must, because to make it clear from the Slovak position, from the first moment on when basically oil embargo was put on the table, we agreed politically to it. You have never heard anybody from Slovakia saying that we are opposing oil embargo. No, not at all. But then we've been facing reality, and we were told that we need some transition time. A solution was found, and I can announce now that after the package was agreed by the European Council on Monday, I think, half or 1 hour ago, there was an agreement in Coreper. So the news that you've heard yesterday that the package allegedly was reopened, now in Coreper we have an agreement on legal text, and that is a very good news. So long story short, I mean, we agreed politically we need this transition. We will stick to what we have agreed, and we will use the transition period for decoupling and for decreasing, for departing from that dependency of on Russian oil deliveries. No doubt about that.
Good.
If I may just come in a second.
Quickly, yes. I do want to go back to our friend in Ukraine.
I fully agree, but on the first point, on the enlargement, but it has become a blunt instrument. It's our most important instrument in geopolitical terms. But we should not create, we have to be watchful what kind of signals we're sending to other countries, other regions. And again, the Western Balkans has been waiting for 19 years. We have the Republika Srpska, we have other places there. We have to be watchful. And the only thing I'm saying is, let's get our act together. Open accession negotiations, I believe we agree on that, Ivan, with North Macedonia and Albania. Give visa liberalization to Kosovo. Think about candidate status for Bosnia, if you think about Moldova and Ukraine. So we have a geopolitical responsibility for our neighborhood, and it's not limited to one country. We have our neighbor, and we have to think probably twice again about North Africa, but this is a difference, not about membership, but there is a geopolitical responsibility we have, and we have to face up to this challenge.
Justin, you've opened. Sorry to take in the floor again.
The door.
But
I'm going to close it soon. But
no,
go ahead,
quickly. We like each other.
Yeah.
That's the demonstration of it. But you've opened the Pandora's box, where I have to respond to what my friend is saying. By granting candidate status to Ukraine, which is so urgent, we are not doing it at the expense of progress by the Western Balkans. And my dear friend, because you do support Albania and North Macedonia, the problem is not in Ukraine. We've been delaying this for months and months and months, and as we speak at this moment, in spite of the fact that the Commission said it's long overdue, the beginning with them of negotiations, we are blocking it as a member state. So I don't think we should remind us in context of Ukrainians' ambitions of our commitment to integration of the Western Balkans. It's not a zero-sum game, not at all. We are not neglecting folks and guys in the Western Balkans, but now the question is, what else should boost the morale of Ukrainians when they are fighting for their existence, for our values, if not this bold commitment of us giving them a clear perspective? And I'm closing the Pandora's box.
Okay, well, wait, yes. Good. Mr. Senek, I want to turn to you, because the thing I worry about is there's something emblematic here about someone who is in Ukraine on the front line, watching people somewhere else argue about Ukraine and not being able to weigh in. So I'm very keen for you to put your oar in on this. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me echo what Secretary Gallagher said in his remarks, that peace is inconceivable without solidarity. And when we speak about European solidarity, we expect that the solidarity will be tangible, including the prospects for EU membership for Ukraine. Ukrainians sacrifice their lives for a better European future of their children. Thousands of lives. just to make sure that their children have a better European future as an equal member of the European Union and the European family. Speaking of and drawing parallel with Balkans, I think that granting Ukraine a candidate status does not contradict the enlargement process of the Western Balkans. First, because all countries will be equal in this process, and we are not asking for any separate doors to EU membership. Second, because in the history of the EU, the timing of an application has not always determined the way for enlargement for the country. Although Finland applied for membership later than Cyprus, it was in the enlargement wave along with Austria and Sweden. At the same time, Cyprus was included in the next wave of enlargement with Baltic states and others. So I think that, again, one does not contradict another, but that would be a clear message, a clear prospect, a clear signal for Ukrainians. And according to the recent poll, 91% of Ukrainians support the European integration, whereby the support among the European Union members of Ukraine is also quite high. Recent polls show 66% of EU citizens agree that Ukraine should be in the EU. So I think that now it's a time for politicians to follow the people's will.
All right, I'd like to turn things over to our audience. I want to remind everyone that you are, it's possible to ask questions using your GlobeSec app. I will get them. And I want also everyone to follow a certain protocol here, which is please stand, please identify yourself, and most importantly, please ask a question. We are here to hear what these gentlemen have to say, and so let's give them a chance to say it. I also, just on a separate note, I want to encourage, in particular, female members of the audience to ask questions, because we are a manel up here, and so please, ladies in the audience, please make sure to raise your hand and have your voice heard as well. Do we have a first question? Who wants to jump in on this? All right, well, in the absence of one from the audience, I'll take one from an anonymous questioner who wants to hear a bit about the issue of the EU and Turkey, and I'm assuming that the underlying question here has to do with the NATO joining NATO, the process of Finland and Sweden joining NATO, and the way that Turkey seems to be holding that up. Anyone want to jump in and share their thoughts on that particular thorny topic? Mr. Korčok.
No, I think when it comes to NATO, it has to be Austria.
The answer willingly on your behalf, but I believe this time.
With Switzerland, you're the only ones already, or still hesitating somehow. But with all due respect, no. I mean, we've heard for the first time 2 weeks ago in Berlin, when we were joined by our colleagues, foreign ministers of Sweden and Finland, a clear intention of these two countries. Then they've made steps on a parliamentarian level that they want to be members of NATO. I will not basically circumvent the question, but just pause for a second. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Thank you, Mr. Putin. Unthinkable is happening. Sweden, 200 years of non-allied, basically, defense. Finland, 2. And then within 3 months, the European landscape and political map, if you want, is dramatically changing. Second, yes, there is an issue. And we need unanimity within NATO, and our Turkish colleagues have made it very clear. And unless we have a clear commitment by Swedish and Finnish future members, I dare say, to how they respond to Turkish concerns regarding PKK and terrorism, everybody knows about that. There will not be their consent and their agreement. But I spoke yesterday or day before yesterday with my friend Mevlut Çavuşoğlu. I asked him about that state, so negotiations are underway. More progress needs to be done. And I remain confident. I can share with you what I encouraged him, Mevlut, but also Ann Linde and Pekka, our Finnish colleague, to really negotiate it bona fide with good intentions and get a deal done before Madrid summit, which is at the end of June. And then NATO will be stronger with
What do you put the odds? The odds of that happening before Madrid? How would you rate them?
I mean, he understood the message, because I think that would be ideal outcome of it. I don't want to speculate on it. I don't want to go intentionally. I don't want to go too far for that, because I'm interested in a good result, and I don't think it's important to go into more details than I have shared with you. But I'm confident.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah. So thank you.
I want to stick with you, because you've proven wonderfully willing to take on some hard questions. So this is what we call a pie eating contest in America, where the reward is more pie. And so I want to talk about refugees, because Slovakia has taken on about 500,000 refugees. I think a huge number. Far more than many larger, wealthier countries. This is true of not just Slovakia, Poland as well, Hungary as well, a lot of the countries in the region. I wonder whether you think it's time for some of the larger countries in the western part of Europe to start considering whether they might take on some of the resettlement of these refugees, and whether that's something that comes up in conversation. Because I know that it's not just a huge cost. There's a sort of people's patience can wear thin, and then there's a larger problem of a potential political backlash in some of these countries. So would one way to address or preempt some of those negative outcomes be for some of the burden of this refugees, as Mr. Gallagher talked about, for some of that burden to also be shared?
I don't want to fall in that trap, into what you want to drag me into, of course, because no, I mean, I entirely understand what you mean by that, and I don't think this is the moment, at least in a situation as we speak, even with 500,000 who crossed the border from Ukraine to Slovakia. Just 1/7 of them has stayed in Slovakia, which is a huge number. Of course, but I don't think that at this moment we have to now appeal to the Western countries and reopen the discussion, take them from us. Instead, I want to thank Slovak citizens, which have proven that that they have hearts and minds open, and we've opened schools, we've opened our houses.
It's remarkable.
And I'm proud of my nation, which once again has shown this solidarity. Nevertheless, and you're right, it's very costly undertaking, if I may say so. But if I dare say, it's not a burden. It's not a burden. It has not become a political issue which, up until now, would be instrumentalized to that level that we would say, okay, it's enough. But I fairly have to recognize as well, should the war continue, should we face another wave of those seeking refuge in Slovakia, then we will have a problem. But two, I think it is important to say that there are many Western European countries who have taken Ukrainians, including Austria, Alexander can say, including Germany, including many countries where Ukrainians seeking refuge have their relatives and so on. So up until now, I think we can be proud of our approach to that challenge. For the audience, in Slovakia, on an annual basis, on annual level, we've had like 15, 30 asylums that we have granted.
The average generally.
Average, and like 160 asylum seekers, 161, 60. And then overnight you have 5,000 coming per day, and of course they're not seeking asylum, but just to demonstrate the dimension of that scale and of that challenge.
It's remarkable. Yeah. It's remarkable. Alex, did you wanted to?
I have to say, and just to add, I mean, yes. For instance, this year alone, we have 21,000 asylum seekers already in Austria. We have always in our history been at the crossroads of Europe. and over 300,000 Ukrainians, displaced people, have entered the territory. Nearly 80,000 are staying in Austria, and there's a huge wave of solidarity, of compassion for them, and I'm very proud of it. But we have to keep in mind that, for instance, Austria was the first country to establish an air bridge from Moldova, because the country carrying the biggest burden per capita as far as the refugees or the displaced people are concerned is Moldova.
Right.
And we were the first country to establish an air bridge. We said we're going to fly in 2,000 displaced Ukrainian citizens to Austria. Up to now, only 500 have taken up this offer. Most Ukrainians, for the time being, we shouldn't forget, they're women with small children often, the men, or the brothers or fathers or sons are still in Ukraine fighting, and many of them don't want to go too far away from Ukraine, and many are already returning. We have nearly the flow going back to Western Ukraine is nearly as high as those leaving.
Which tells you a lot about the way the war is going, by the way.
So this is it, absolutely.
Right.
But it is an interesting fact that actually, if you offer them to, to fly a couple of 100 kilometers further to the west, many are hesitant for the time being because they expect to be able to return. And I believe this is something which is a very strong sign of them believing in the fate of their own country.
It's a great point. We had a question, the gentleman here in the middle row, if we could get him a microphone, please. Please make sure to stand up, tell us who you are, and ask a question of our panelist.
Yes, good afternoon. Konstantin Eggert, a freelance journalist from Vilnius, working mostly for Deutsche Welle. I have actually two questions, one to Herr Schallenberg and another one to Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine.
Keep them brief, please.
Yes, I know. Don't worry, I work for the radio and television. So, Herr Schallenberg, your country, unfortunately, has a reputation for being weak on Russia, with Ms. Kneissl dancing with Putin, OMV, Raiffeisenbank, spy scandals. Was 24th of February a decisive moment when you kind of break with the past as a country, and what's being done about it? And to the Deputy Foreign Minister, we already heard about an Italian peace plan, so the P word was already out less than 4 months after the second invasion started. Let me be quite sort of provocative. Are you afraid that there are going to be more peace plans in the coming months? I hope you understand what I mean.
Thank you for this question, because I'm happy to be able to rectify some things.
The first one.
The first one. I said repeatedly publicly that I would never run the risk to dance with Vladimir Putin, not in the past and not in the future. And no, it wasn't the 24th of February. This is the line of this government. I'm the first Foreign Minister of Austria since we regained independence after the Second World War to have declared a Russian diplomat persona non grata, well before the attack on Ukraine. And I said repeatedly that we have to be aware, and actually this is common EU approach. What were the terms on Russia, which we adopted 2 years ago? It was engage, constrain, pushback. And we have to acknowledge that we are a minority. The countries standing up for pluralism, for democracy, for human rights. We are on this planet a minority. And Austria has never been neutral as far as values are concerned or human rights are concerned. We know exactly where we stand. And yes, we, as other countries, Slovakia, Germany, Hungary, many others, use the opportunity to invest, to be present. Many companies are present and have been present in Ukraine, in Belarus, and in Russia. And it has been, a risk from beginning on, and now they're all, paying a price to a certain degree, and there will be an enormous economic shift. But the line of the Austrian government is extremely clear, and you can be for a lengthy time in the council, regardless of the 24th of February, and Ivan knows it, and all my colleagues know that, without ever finding out that Austria has a status of military neutrality.
Right. Mr. Senek, would you like to address this question about the Italian peace plan and potential other peace plans?
If I may, I would rather speak about, broader context of security guarantees for Ukraine. This is what we work with our partners now, because definitely, as we understand that the UNSC, the United Nations Security Council, was not able to secure peace and sovereignty of Ukraine. Therefore, definitely we need a stronger security guarantees that would definitely work in case of any aggression against Ukraine. So for the time being, there are different ideas, and we work with our partners, with first and foremost, with the European Union, with United States and Canada on making sure that this tragedy and this war will never happen again.
Very diplomatic.
We've been talking a lot about Russia, but I'm going to use my moderator's prerogative to ask a slightly different question about a different country that looms very large in all of this, and that is China. I'm curious, the conventional view, I'll tell you, the conventional view in the States, at least in the Washington to New York corridor part of the States, is that China has essentially lost Europe. It's lost particularly Eastern and Central Europe after having made serious inroads for many, many years with economic ties. I would love to hear each of you talk a little bit, very briefly, about your country's current relations with China. What's going on? Is that perception correct?
I believe you're fully correct. And what we are experiencing is, you could call it the geopolitical ice bucket we just received, actually. And yes, it came from Russia, but there is a lot of hard thinking, I believe, in boardrooms too, about what will be in the future relationship with China. And we are facing a situation politically or geopolitically which is difficult, because we are looking at the regionalization of globalization. Many things are breaking down. We just experienced what happens when Shanghai closes the ports, and the whole economy is actually restructuring. And I believe this will have a huge impact on the way we interact with China in the future. I have been recently to India and Pakistan, and there's one point we shouldn't forget sometimes in our debates. We have an extremely Eurocentric way of looking at this confrontation, and we have to broaden our thinking. The narrative in South Asia, the narrative in Africa is a completely different one. We are winning the information war here. We have won it in Europe, but we have not won it in Africa and in Asia.
Is it winnable there?
I believe it's a challenge, because we still have, the ongoing narrative is there. They're facing enormous problems and challenges. Look at Egypt, look at Lebanon, Libya and other countries. We have wheat missing, you have fallout of oil seeds and others, and increasing energy prices. And the narrative there is, this is all because of the Western sanctions. So we have to work harder to convince them and to get our narrative across, because we might have won it here, but it is winnable. It has to be won, because at the end of the day, we know that the phase we are entering, there's no name yet for it, but we know already now it's going to be more confrontational. There will be no return to status quo ante in the next years. You cannot believe that by the end of the year, next year, in 2 years, we return to the way the world has been beforehand. No, this is the watershed moment. And it will be a more confrontational phase. It's going to be tougher, colder, and rougher. And I said the 30 years of holidays from history are over for us. And we had this peace dividend, which we used, and this peace dividend is over too. And I believe we have to think very hard how we approach multilateralism, how we approach international organizations, how we approach the cooperation which is necessary. No, we won't stop globalization. We won't close in our doors. We cannot, we shouldn't, but we have to think twice. The easy times are over.
Interesting. You mentioned the food crisis, and there's actually a question from Heinrich Kreft, who asks, are we thinking enough about the looming food crisis? This could lead to hunger uprisings in Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, a new wave of refugees potentially for Europe. I am wondering what is the EU's approach at the moment to mitigating this problem? I know that there have been discussions that was the next big thing to tackle after the oil. Where do things stand?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I mean, this is an enormous challenge, and that's what I referred to when I said we don't only have a challenge in our immediate neighborhood, but the question is whether we are capable of exporting our model of life and our security, Western Balkans and Eastern Europe, but we have to be very watchful what is happening in the Middle East and Northern Africa. And the situation we are facing there, or the countries are facing, is very dire. And we have to be aware that probably, and I just had today a lengthy discussion in Vienna with members of the government, or Austrian government on this. We have to be aware that we need a lot of humanitarian aid in the future. We will need a lot of development aid. We are facing situations where we might see in a couple of months a huge migration flow moving towards Europe.
Can I ask on a very practical level, what is preventing the wheat from Ukraine from going, over land elsewhere? I understand the naval blockade, and I understand there's an issue with railway gauges and things like that, but this seems like a soluble problem. What am I missing?
Well, it's starting. We are using, one of the ways is obviously the Danube, and we are providing what we can. And at first, there were a couple of trucks arriving. Now we have installed the system, but it's by far not enough. We're talking about millions and millions of tons of wheat and other things. And Black Sea is difficult, let's put it that way, even with the ports of Varna and others, but my colleague from Kiev will know that to answer that better. We are doing what we can from Austrian side to help. We need these solidarity corridors, as we call it. We need to get this is good for Ukraine, this is good for the world.
Sure.
But it takes time, and we have to acknowledge that what comes out will be more costly because the transport is more costly.
Because of the prices, right?
Absolutely.
It's all a cascading mess. We had a question over here. The gentleman wearing glasses in this row here. Yes, can you give him the mic? Please tell us who you are and let us know what you'd want to ask.
Hello, I'm Nico Langer from Germany. Minister Korčok was kind of joking this away earlier, but what Minister Schallenberg just said provoked me in asking this question again. You said rough times are ahead, things have certainly changed, will change in the future. Why did Austria then not reconsider NATO membership as other European Union members did who are joining NATO now?
Question. Well, I mean, each country has a different history, each country has a different development, each country has a different geographical situation. And we are following the debate in Finland and Sweden with great interest. But for the time being, we still have in Austria an enormous support for neutrality. 70 to 80% of the Austrian population are in favor of neutrality. The last politician who started a debate on neutrality was Wolfgang Schüssel, and it didn't fare well for him. What we need in Austria is a debate, because the problem is many people believe that neutrality equals security, and that's wrong. And and you said it beforehand, without wanting to be cynical, we have to be nearly thankful to Vladimir Putin, because in this ice bucket we received, he failed for the time being in getting his strategic goals. NATO is more relevant in the public eye, the West is more united than ever, and many countries are increasing the budget for the military services. So are we, and I believe that's the right approach, because if you're neutral at the end of the day, you have to invest a considerable sum in your own security. And yes, we are all in favor for partnership for peace, but there's no willingness in the Austrian public to go the way of Finland and Sweden, and there is a big difference in the geographical and historical experiences.
Can I add something? Nico Langer's question is okay, but has to be fine-tuned in a way. It's for you to ask, but look, we have to respect here. I fully understand what Alexander is saying. We understand if a sovereign country says, I want to remain neutral, military neutral, it's your choice. And what I want to say by that, we have to remember, everybody knows it in this room, but for the purpose of public communication, we have to say it was not NATO that was pushed Sweden and Finland into its ranks. As a matter of fact, I negotiated together with Ambassador Kaczor here our accession to NATO. NATO has never, pushed us. It costed us so much to convince NATO members to join. And I'm underscoring that because we'll be hearing at the moment when they become members, it's aggressive NATO expansion again. So that's not the case. It's the sovereign countries, both Sweden and Finland at this moment, who have taken their sovereign choice to become members of this historically most successful alliance. So I think it is important to respect their choice, but I think at the same time, it's important to respect the choice of Austria in this moment.
And as I said beforehand, you can be sitting in the European Council and you won't notice that we are actually military neutral because we're not politically. And when we used the European Peace Facility, Josep Borrell called me, it was a Sunday, I believe 1 week after the attack, and he asked me, do you have a problem with it? And I said, no, I will use constructive abstention. I won't prevent the others to move on. Then he asked me, oh, great, can you call the 4 others, which is Ireland, Malta, and I said, yes. And then he said, can you call Berlin too? And I said, no, that's your job. But here again, we have crossed many red lines, so to say, in Brussels. And Austria has declared, before we joined the European Union, that we will be in full solidarity with the common foreign and security policy. And this now is crunch time. And we are in full solidarity with the European foreign policy on this area.
Mr. Senek, we have just about 2 minutes left, and I would very much like to give you the last word. Please, whatever it is you'd like to weigh in, and I'd like to hear from you before we close out.
Sorry about, not intervening timely because of the lack of the internet. I wanted just to add on the food security issue. It is a big problem, and actually now, because of the Russian actions, we have 22 million tons of grain blocked in our seaports. We do work with our partners, neighbors, engaging international organizations to unblock and make sure that that nations in Africa who suffer already from this shortage of food will receive corn, grain, wheat, you name it. There is another thing, what is happening with Ukrainian grain, which is stolen by Russians now, is reminding me of the energy blackmail. But now the food is used to blackmail the entire world. So that was my message. And this is critical for Ukraine and for our partners to unblock those exports of the Ukrainian grain, including, what we do now using Danube and other routes, including the land ones as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for taking our questions. This was an interesting discussion. I learned a lot. Thank you all very much. Now we're going to go straight into our next session, which is led by Kevin Barron, and it begins with a short video.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Pardon us as we swap the room out. My name is Kevin Barron. I'm the executive editor of Defense One. I'm your moderator for our final session today. No? I'm told there's no audio in the room, actually. I'll wait a little. Waiting for a cue. Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me now? Better? Yes. Excellent. Welcome, welcome. My name is Kevin Barron. I'm the executive editor of Defense One, a digital publication out of Washington, D.C. I'm a Pentagon reporter by trade. And it's a pleasure to be here to moderate this final afternoon session, a unique session with 3 prime ministers. I don't know what that makes this, a trifecta of prime ministers here. Some housekeeping. I'm to remind you that you can use the GlobeSec app to follow along, to log on to Slido and ask questions. Also, I can call on you, I'm sure. This is a 45-minute session till 6 o'clock, and we're going to get right to it with our prime ministers. The title is, I hate to say I told you so, the reality of security of the EU's eastern border. I have Prime Minister Heger from the Slovak Republic, Petkov from Bulgaria, and Kariņš from Latvia. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Indulge me a little setup. In preparing for this session and doing my homework, one of the obvious trends that I've noticed is a difference in how some world leaders and prime ministers and presidents are talking about the war in Ukraine and its final goals, and how others are, especially in the United States, where I've just come from. And on one hand, you have some leaders asking or calling for a total win, a total victory, saying Ukraine needs to win, Russia must lose. Pretty stark black and white language. Others are calling for something different, something more like getting to a negotiating table, finding a peace. And just this week, we had some important statements from the President of the United States, from Joe Biden, that I wanted to introduce to the audience, introduce to the discussion, and then get your thoughts and reactions to where the war needs to go, the conflict needs to go, and why you have the goals that you do. The United States is somewhere in the middle between win or negotiate. If you look at what they're spending, if you look at what kind of arms they're giving, and senior U.S. officials briefed reporters just before I came here yesterday. And one of the quotes that they gave was, "We will not pressure the Ukrainian government in private or in public to make territorial concessions." And Joe Biden wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where he said, "We will also continue reinforcing NATO's eastern flank with forces and capabilities from the United States and other allies." But nobody seems to know the extent to which Biden is willing to go. He also said that he was pledging his support for seeing a Ukraine with the means to deter and defend itself against further aggression, but only to get to the negotiating table. He also said if Russia does not pay a heavy price for its actions, then it's a missed opportunity. So we have Ukraine should deter and defend itself. Ukraine should win. Ukraine should get to the negotiating table. Give us your positions on the end state as you want it to happen and why you believe so. And I'm going to start on the end with Prime Minister Kariņš, because you seem to have been the most vocal about your position.
Well, thank you very much. I'm convinced of one thing, that if we want long-term peace and security in Europe, there's only one way to attain that. And that is through a Russian loss in this war and Ukrainian victory. I'll briefly explain. Anything other than a clear loss for Russia, perceived by Russia to be a loss, would simply mean Russia licking its war wounds, retooling, rebuilding its army, and sooner or later, in 1 year, in 2 years, who knows, advancing once again. In Ukraine, or elsewhere, it doesn't really make a difference, because Putin is still thinking as an imperialistic power that it's important and necessary to eat up neighbors. He did it in Georgia in 2008. He did it in Ukraine in 2014, and we did not respond in the proper kind. That is, we did not give a strong enough signal, and Putin understood this works. And now he tried a flat-out war against Ukraine, and he is not winning this war. But he has still not clearly lost it. And if we want peace, Ukraine clearly has to win, and Russia clearly has to lose. We have to break the cycle of imperialistic expansion. Otherwise, we all pay the price, and the price in the future will be much greater than the price that is being paid today in Ukraine, in Ukrainian lives, and in the West in terms of money necessary.
Prime Minister Heger, I should have called on you first in your own house here. Do you agree with those statements?
Well, of course I agree, and if I can, I will add to this, because we have to. You asked the question whether we think that Ukraine should win and Russia should lose. Like this would be a question of what would we like. But I don't think this is not about what we would like, and Krišjānis just explained that. This is not a hockey game. Now we speak about human lives. I mean, we saw the brutal attack, and we see that this war is harming and is actually killing innocent civilians. I mean, we all know these pictures from Bucha or from Borodyanka or Irpin, and we see how brutal this is. And by seeing this and realizing that we neglected the nature of Vladimir Putin for so long. This is for us actually a great wake-up call, and it should be such a great lessons learned, and that we don't underestimate this anymore for the future generations. That's why I'm so glad that the European Union and also the Western world reacted so quickly and so massively, because we're writing in history, and we have to show for the history to any authoritarian who wants to attack any country any country at all, but in such a brutal way even more, that this is dead end, that it doesn't make sense. So that's why it's so important, and it's vital for the democracy, for our values, for belief of our values, that Ukraine wins. It's a duty for us to help Ukraine to win. It's not about they should win. They must win, because we win with them. And we see that they are actually willing to pay by their own lives for our values. And we live too long in a comfort zone where we, on one hand, proclaim that democracy, freedom, human rights, rule of law, and all these values are important. But we didn't really feel the difference. Now, a crisis came, and we see that it is really not for granted. It is really not for granted. It is so easy to lose, and we see it in our neighborhood. So, like I said, this is such a strong wake-up call for us that this is the way we need to approach it. It is actually Vladimir Putin attacked our values. He's testing how much we believe in our values, how much we really live them, or we only speak about them. And I'm glad that the Western world shows that we live these values and we honor these values, because we know that these are the best values for the life on this earth.
I have follow-up thoughts, but Prime Minister Petkov, same question to you: win or negotiate?
This is why I like to be on this panel, because we always speak in one voice in the European Council, and we'll do today as well. The reality is there is no other choice. Clear win, full territorial integrity, there is no room for compromise. Very rarely in history we have the same thing repeating. In 2014 we had Crimea. Crimea obviously was not a clear win strategy, and now, few years after that, we're faced in a situation where there are rockets flying in Kiev. So it's the definition of being crazy to do the same thing and expect different results. So this time we have to speak in one voice. We have to have absolutely clarity that that's the only way to go. And we have to be thankful to our Ukrainian friends that they're fighting a war for us. So anything that we have to do to support them, we stand by them, because In my country, in the capital city, we still have monuments of Russians holding gun over their heads. So if they don't win, we all don't win. If they win, we can have a European member state 400 kilometers away, rather than unpredictable regime that will be happy to march next door if they have the opportunity. So no doubt in my mind that that's the only solution in this conflict.
Yes, Prime Minister Heger.
If I may to add, because you put it in a position where win or negotiate. But I don't think this is really the case, because if you look at Volodymyr Zelensky, even before the war, he was crying out, I don't want a war, I want to negotiate. But what do we negotiate about? What, that Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukrainian people freely give up their territory to Russia just because Russia thinks it's right? What do we negotiate? He wants to negotiate peace. He wants to keep his territorial integrity as a democratic and free country supposed to. So the negotiation is only about whether Putin pulls back his military by his own decision, or he will be pushed by the force of protection and defense of Ukrainian people. Unfortunately, Ukrainians weren't given an option of peace talks, so they have to fight. So they were pushed into a defense. And I remember when I spoke to Volodymyr Zelensky when I was in Ukraine, he himself said, we want peace. We don't want war. Our people are dying. We don't want our people are dying. We don't want our people dying. We want peace. We all are a fellowship of peace, and he himself as well. But Putin is not providing this kind of option. He is not providing a negotiation, a true objective negotiation on him pulling his back, because he says, no, I want my target, and take it or leave it.
Yes.
Just very quickly to follow up on your comment, absolutely right. Let's look at the other scenario. Let's say if we have territories occupied by Russia. I mean, this is not peace. This is a frozen conflict. I'm sure I saw the spirit of the Ukrainians. They'll keep on fighting, whether it's going to be a formal war or special military groups trying to defend their own land. So the only way to have peace is to get the military of Russia out of the country. Otherwise, it's a frozen conflict, instability, lives being lost. It's impractical to think, from what I saw from the strong Ukrainian spirit, that this can ever be a solution that they would accept. And I actually praise them for that.
Well, I ask about win versus negotiate because, you know, I'm a journalist. We follow the words, right? Should is different than could when it comes from world leaders. It also sets policy. It sets funding. It sets defense budgets, and it sets I think it sets what's permitted when it comes to what kind of arms should be given to the Ukrainians. A question that we've all been debating and talking about for months now. And this, latest statement by the President of the United States came with yet another very large new set of arms, including HIMARS, a long-range artillery capability, but with medium-range missiles and a promise not to strike into Ukraine. So if the goal is win, full territorial integrity, pushing the Russian military out, doesn't Ukraine need more than they're being given right now?
Well, we heard from Volodymyr Zelensky even this noon that, of course, they need more weapons where they will be able to push Russians out. And that's always what he says. He doesn't want to attack Russia. I mean, they were attacked, so we have to clearly understand that. And they are the ones who are fighting the war on the ground. So they are the ones who are best capable to say what kind of weaponry they need in order to progress and get them out of their territory that is given to them by the borders. So I think this is where our, I would even say duty, but it's because we understand what's going on. We just discussed this. So yeah, we should help them to provide that kind of weapons so they can win the war on their own territory, because they don't want to expand their territory. That's very clearly, and it needs to be said, because somebody might try to think that they want to go into a counterattack, actually expand themselves. That's not the truth.
Prime Minister Petkov, Bulgaria recently has voted to allow Ukraine to use the port to repair Ukrainian equipment. What else militarily is Bulgaria willing to do?
So that was a very interesting debate. we're in a four-party coalition. And one of my coalition partners was, I think, mostly due to fear, not due to ideology. They said we should not send weapons to Ukraine, we should put all the humanitarian aid, deal with the refugees, but we're too close to the conflict to be sending weapons. But as there is a saying, if there is a will, there is a way. So we came up with a compromise where we said, let's help them repair existing military equipment that they have, that they're former Russian equipment. We have factories to repair this. And some of my other coalition partners that were really strong in support, and my own party is very strong in support of Ukraine, said, oh, that's not enough. But now looking at it, we are repairing now, just this month, we have already started the work of 80 tanks. I mean, Bulgaria doesn't have 80 tanks to give, but repairing 80 tanks gives more military power than any other donations we would have given. So even in this complex political situation back at home, we were able to deliver a striking power to the Ukrainian army, and we'll be delivering more. That's beyond what a small gift would give, yet still maintaining this coalition balance. So I'm really happy to say that in terms of real net practical effect to the military of Ukraine, we've done a good job.
We have a Slido poll ready to, I think, put to the audience. I think it'll come up. Guess what the question is? Simply, should NATO allies arm Ukraine for a total win or to negotiate? And again, stick with the arms question, if you may, Prime Minister Kariņš. You know, could be a total win. Some military experts say requires much more. HIMARS that were just announced by the Biden administration and other countries is something that Zelensky had asked for weeks. We've long gotten past talks of no-fly zones. We know there are other secret capabilities that we're not seeing. What else should be given, or do you think would change the game to get away from this talk of just arming Ukraine enough to give them a strong position at a negotiating table versus pushing Russians out of their original territory?
Right, so you have to remember that my country, when we were getting the intelligence about the Russian build-up starting in the fall through the winter, we made a decision that we were going to send arms to Ukraine, just in case there's a war. And we sent, among other weapons, the Stingers, the anti-aircraft weapons, and they thankfully got there, I believe it was one day before actual hostilities. The ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador in Riga, says that actually these Stingers helped to thwart the Russian attack on the Kievan airport. That was a failed attempt that actually was a big early game changer. We have given about 250 million euros of military aid to date, but to give a context, that is 1/3 of our annual military budget. It's almost 1% of GDP. And we have given everything that we have and would gladly give more, but the difficulty is we don't have a lot of these weapon systems that Ukraine is asking for. But what I'm suggesting and saying to my NATO colleagues is, if we all proportionately help, as we have done, as the Estonians have done, then Ukraine would have the firepower to get the job done. Because it's not a question, is the Ukrainian military capable? They're more than capable. They simply need the tools for the job. And if they have not used that tool before, we have seen in the course of the past 3 months, they're damn quick learners. So that's not an issue. And then there's the debate that shows up in the media about provocation. You know, do we provoke, by doing this, do we provoke Putin to do something? Yes. And then I think, provoke someone who is doing genocide? I mean, who started the war? Not Ukraine. Putin started the war. On what pretext? Some ill-conceived 19th century idea of imperialism and the grand, great Russia, or something like that, that is killing people, innocent civilians, not only soldiers. When they can't get advances on the battlefield, they simply go to the civilian side and bomb everything. So in my view, the only way, the only provocation is to not arm Ukraine, to not arm ourselves in NATO, and to not strengthen the eastern flank. Because Putin, with perceived weakness, he will move forward and attack and kill people and have his own army killed. So the only way to provoke him is by not arming Ukraine and not arming ourselves. So we have to do this, and we need not be afraid. We need not be afraid of Putin. And especially, we need be afraid of our own strength as democracies. We have to relearn the old truth is that if you want peace, always be prepared for war. And not be afraid of our own strength.
I think the poll results are in. You can flash those on the screen.
Oh.
No question there. I don't know if that's maybe the White House will see that poll. You know, I'm not sure where everyone in the audience has come from. I'll assume that it's heavily from the CEE countries already, and it seems the closer you get to the conflict, the more that's the result that I hear. Sir, you mentioned NATO expansion, or you mentioned the NATO flank. I want to bring up both those issues before we get questions from the audience. We have Sweden and Finland, their application is in, they're speaking to the Turks. We keep hearing little bits from mostly not from the Turkish side, but from other sides, sounding very confident that it will still happen, that Finland and Sweden will join, and the plan or the hope is that they'll be able to join and stand for the family photo in Madrid at the NATO summit. Do you have any intelligence to share? Do you have any reason to believe that will happen by Madrid? Any of you?
If we have intelligence for what? I didn't hear you.
If you have any reason to believe, or you do believe that Finland and Sweden will join NATO by the Madrid summit.
Well, we hope that all the obstacles will be removed by then, and that's what we all wish for. And it's great that they showed the sign of doing this. So now, for me, the most important thing is that the willingness and the signal that they gave, and so let's do it, yeah. And we'll see whether I don't have that intelligence.
I was hoping for something, at least. NATO, the NATO presence, especially in the Balkans. Prime Minister Kariņš, you've called in the past for division-level capability. Explain what you mean by that and why it's important.
Very simple. So right now, it's 5 years now, because of the occupation of Crimea and the already 8-year-old war in Ukraine, NATO decided to strengthen the Baltics and Poland with an enhanced forward presence. And it was set up as what's called a tripwire. And the idea is very simple. You place some NATO troops on the ground, some capabilities, in addition to local capabilities. And if the Russians come in, you sort of know they've come in. It's, ding, oh, they're in the country. Then we lose some territory. Then NATO comes shining, riding on the horse and with overwhelming firepower, regains the territory. That has been the strategy until this phase of the war in Ukraine. But it's clear that strategy is no longer valid, because what happens when the Ukrainian army comes in? They kill, rape, and deport civilians. And we cannot afford any more than when Russia comes in. Thank you for being understanding, and I hope he will still have my job when I get home. But when the Russians come in, they leave complete devastation behind. So, as a reaction, we need to readjust the NATO position. What we're saying is, in each Baltic country, we're also very small countries. If Ukraine is large, it has what's called strategic depth. The Baltic countries are very small, and we're between Russia and the sea. It's a little difficult to reinforce us because of there's logistical issues. So we are arguing for a permanent brigade level NATO presence with a division level capabilities, and that's sort of code. What are division level capabilities? It means air defense, coastal defense, etc. All of the bells and whistles that everyone who's in the military knows to get the job done, in order to not deter Russia by a potential punishment. So they come in, then we punish them by waging war and kicking them out. But to stop Russia through deterrence, by having a robust enough presence that Russia will never come in the first place. Because if they attempt to cross that line, they would lose from day one. And this is what we need, is a robust presence with all of the necessary capabilities from the Baltic through the Black Sea to make sure that this never happens, so we can put all of our concentration on helping Ukraine win the war. Because the battle that never happens is the cheapest battle. And if we have to regain territory, that costs lives, that costs a lot of money. And it's much cheaper to be preemptive and to change, adapt your position to the new realities on the ground.
Gentlemen, response?
If I may, just to follow up, because I fully agree, and it actually sets a new challenge ahead of us to change the architecture of the European defense. Because till now, we looked at it as individual countries having their individual militaries, and once they're being attacked by anybody, Article 5 starts, they fight their own war on their territory while the allies come to help. Well, we know that if the Article 5 is started, it's kind of too late. Because look at what happened. I mean, we are in over 90 days now, and look how Ukraine looks like. I mean, the Danish Mihal, we had him today online in one of the discussions, and he was counting out what exactly they already bombed, etc. It's just the property, but also the lives. Every day they're losing hundreds of lives, etc. So till the allies would come, even part of being of alliance, then we know that it's costly on lives and property. So that's why we, just like Krišjānis just said, we have to totally rechange the whole architecture and look at Europe as a territory, one territory that we need to protect. And based on that, we have to put units, mixed units. I mean, the EFP is a great example how this can work. Slovakia is one of the last countries that actually started this enhanced forward presence. We didn't have that till the start of the war. Right after the war started, Germany came to us, Netherlands, Czech Republic, Slovenia immediately said, we are willing to provide you our capabilities and our soldiers. Within 2 months from the start, we had 4 batteries of air defense, Patriots, where before we had 1 S-300, which we gave to Ukraine. But we changed, our all air defense was based on 1 S-300. Now we have 4 batteries of new modern Patriots. So we have the best air defense we ever had since our history. But we have also other soldiers from other countries helping us to protect our territory. So this is the new model of cooperation and also the protection, but we have to go further out and really define so we can bounce off anybody who wants to attack, that they will not even get in. And this needs a lot of thoughts to it.
And I want to bring the attention to something that we're not talking too often about. If you think how Russia did it, it took them years, but they acquired important infrastructure throughout Europe. A lot of the gas storages were acquired by Gazprom. They were able to decrease the quantity of gas supply just before the war. They knew that the link between gas and electricity was connected, so by stopping the gas, they would increase both electricity and gas prices, and then they did the attack when all of the European leaders are choked with high prices. We have to learn from that, and we have to think about strategic infrastructure on the other side. Unless we start thinking about military mobility and military infrastructure that can work with logistics, with all these units that we're building, we're missing a big part of it. And to give you an example, for example, if a Russian ship blockades the Bosphorus and we cannot enter into the Black Sea, how are we going to supply with oil, with logistics, all along the eastern flank? We cannot. We're done. So we've missed these strategic gaps on our logistics military infrastructure that have to be very quickly built, and again, as my colleagues are saying, in a fully integrated way. For example, we're speaking with our friends in Greece, and we're thinking, what if we can connect Alexandroupolis through Bulgaria, Burgas and Varna, all the way to Constanța, and we do road, rail, bridge, oil pipe. All of a sudden, we have a strategic infrastructure that can support military operation. And we've been speaking in the Council, but I think this is very strategic. If we focus only on the planes, on the tanks, on the troops, and we've missed a bottleneck like the Bosphorus, for example, our whole game may be at a big risk. So now is the time to take the big maps, look at the whole territory, draw the strategic infrastructure that we have to have in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Make sure that it's comprehensive, make sure it's not looked at in a national level. And then we have a chance with this military spending to have a real effective deterrence, so that when we sit in 6 years from now, we don't have a panel, I told you so.
Very good. Always appreciate a call for better logistics. I'm going to read one of our questions that has come in and remind the audience, if you have a question, get ready. I can reach out and call you. They can come around with microphones. On Slido, the top one, it's one we hear a lot. Maybe we've already answered it, but it's worth re-asking. Putin has openly threatened with possible nuclear attacks. Do we have to take this seriously? Could Putin accept defeat without at least using tactical nukes? Any of you?
I would just say that I think one of the most worrying words I've heard from Putin is, what's the point of the world if there is no Russia in it? And actually what I heard is, what's the point of the world if there is no Putin in it? So this type of thinking is very dangerous, but I really hope that regardless how focused the power is in his own hands, that there is enough people around him that such a ludicrous activity would not be put as a real option.
Tactical nukes an option?
If I may to add to this, what just Kiril said, you know, we have to realize that the Western world, again, it's the most developed part of the world. It's the strongest part of the world. So one thing we cannot be afraid of Putin. The opposite is true. We must be bold. Who else, if not us, must be bold? That's the approach we have to have. And I remember when he said for the first time that he's activating the nuclear weapons. I know what had happened in Slovakia, what kind of discussion, how people were afraid, how they reacted, etc. But of course, that's his hybrid warfare he's leading with us. Energies, causing fear, propaganda, etc., etc. I mean, he uses all possible tools to disrupt us, to break us, because he knows that our unity is the strongest power that we have against him, because if we are united, then we are big, we are the strongest, and that's what he fears. So he must use all the tools. So I see these kind of words as one of his tools of hybrid warfare. Of course, we cannot neglect it, we have to be serious about it, but we know once that happens, then we are in total different level. But it's not caused by us. So we cannot give in to the fear that he's trying to cause us, but the opposite, what Krišjānis said, our boldness is the best deterrence for him.
Yes, I don't know, I'm sure the audience is much better read than I am, who said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And when you think about that, every time, I can give you a little secret, every time I start to think, oh my goodness, I look at my colleague Zelensky, and you know, you have to become a little embarrassed. Here's someone who is on the front line. The three of us were sitting in a council meeting on the 25th when the war was just starting, and he addressed us via video link. It was a little shaky link. And he addressed us saying, I don't know if I'll be alive tomorrow. Essentially saying, but to hell if I'm going to give up. And we can look at the Ukrainians and understand what it means to not be afraid. And as my friends are saying, Putin, his weapon is fear. But if he loses that weapon, he loses power over us. And we have to overcome our fear. People in this room are from all over Europe or the world. We live next to Russia. We've been living next to Russia forever. And we have had wars with Russia forever. Last count, well, we're independent. You cannot live your life being afraid as an individual, as a country, as a continent. So anything that is said that should make us tremble, when you start to feel that little tremble inside, if nothing else, sit back and say, but what about Zelensky? And then you feel good all over again.
I thought I saw a hand raise in my eyesight there, but if not, there's a gentleman in the back here who has a finger up. Higher, stand up, introduce yourself, and please ask a question. We're in about 6 minutes to go.
Very quickly, Marek Patraszek, CEC Group. Fantastic unity among the panel, and you talked about unity as being the key strength of NATO in opposing Putin, winning the war against Putin. If Putin declares a ceasefire, are you afraid of splits in that unity within NATO? Siren calls emerging from some capitals in Western Europe, and now's the time to do a deal with Putin and get peace. How can you, gentlemen, and other prime ministers on the eastern flank of NATO, are you worried about that split in NATO unity at that point? And if so, what can you do, or what can we do to prevent that split from happening?
If I may, I mean, just to understand the unity that is not among us, just among us, but is also at the European Council, for example, it's not because we just think the same way. It's because we decided to be united as a priority. And we see it in many decisions, and you see it as we were doing the sanctions packages, etc., that some people were before saying, well, we should do this, and somebody else, we should do something different. So it's not a united position before the discussion. But we said, just because we understand what is the weapon, what is the best weapon against Putin is the unity, so we decided that we will keep this principle of unity. So I'm not afraid that we will lose this unity because it's a unity by decision, not by thinking the same way. So this, if we keep this as a principle and understand that this is the only way for us to really lead the world, and who else should lead the world if not the democratic countries, then we will never give up and we will always watch for it. Of course, there will be temptation, there will be different hidden agendas from Putin, etc., to break our unity. But if we have this priority in mind, then I think we will keep going in the unity, whatever challenge we will face.
I just want to further one point to that. Unity also requires political will when there is political cost. And even to your point further before that on the fear, and so far we've been able to maintain to put down the fear and really move united, even though it costs us politically. When Bulgaria got the news that if we don't pay in rubles, they'll shut off our gas supply in 24 hours. And we're 95% gas dependent. The reason why we said no was, first, I was also very much inspired by Zelensky, and when I was in Kiev seeing the rockets flying our head, actually they collided 500 meters away from us, I said to myself, if they can do it and they can be united, we should be able to take this decision. And the second thing is that I knew that if I cave in as Bulgaria, I would lead my friends and fellows in the European Council to have a much tougher position to stand at home, because then they'll say, Bulgaria accepted it, why don't you accept it at home? So I think to your question, if we're able to contain the unity, and if we're willing to pay the political cost and take the political risk, understanding that's the only way we can be stronger than Putin, I'm very positive of the outcomes going forward. Because we've been able to do it so far, we'll be able to do it for the future as well.
With 3 minutes left, I think the last question for you both, or for you three, I want to ask is, how does it end? Assume Putin's not stopping, not going to the negotiating table. How do you get from here to where you want to be?
Well, in my view, I would be surprised if Putin were to wake up tomorrow morning,
exactly.
Realize his sins, go to confession, and
repent.
Not only stop the war, but pull all of his soldiers back and pay Ukraine money. This would rather surprise me, probably everyone in this room. But what Putin, and think about him as a person, not only as the leader of Russia, he understands power, and he mocks what he perceives as weakness. So it will end when he loses. And he will lose when he actually loses. And that is because, primarily, the Ukrainian willingness and will to fight, and secondarily, because of the West's unfaltering support both militarily, financially, and politically.
I fully agree, and maybe I'll just add that for us it's important to keep our motivation going with the vision and with the hope of the victory. Because that's the only way, just because, what we were speaking at the beginning, it's about our principal values. If we give up on our principal values, then we trade it. That's what we live for in the democratic world. So if we always feel frustrated or tired, we just need to go back to the roots, revisit it and see, yes, let's brush off and let's keep going, because there is only one way out of this. Everything else would be to trade off our values, to give in, to receive or to accept the loss, which we cannot afford for the future generations, for the future democratic world. So just keep going and hope for the victory.
And because I see we have only 40 seconds left, I'll say how does it end in full victory for Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll ask you to stay on stage as we bring up our MC, Ali Aslan, who's going to wrap up the day for us to your left. Ali, good to see you.
Thank you, and wonderful job you did. Let's give a hand to Kevin and the panel again. Thank you so much. Indeed, what started 6 hours ago here on the stage feels like an eternity now, but this is a wrap-up. This is a wrap for day one, which I think was very inspiring, quite thoughtful, and surprising elements and twists this morning. Obviously, we have President Zelensky joining us live here on stage. We had the President of the European Commission, of course, the President of the Republic of Slovakia. We actually had we had three presidents, four prime ministers, obviously, three ministers of foreign affairs, Kevin. So that just gives you an idea. Much more to come tomorrow here on the stage, but also Maria Teresa, of course. We saw a very defiant Vladimir. We saw a very defiant Zelensky this morning, didn't we? Saying, yes, we will fight until the end. Ukraine will prevail, and I think that was echoed throughout. And thank you, Prime Ministers, also for reiterating that message of solidarity as well. Just a side note before we can all go and take a deserved break from this very long day. There's obviously going to be an award ceremony tonight, and there's going to be a lovely award ceremony dinner. And for that, the buses leave at 7 p.m. in the lobby. The dinner starts at 7:30, but the buses leave at 7 p.m. in the lobby. And last thing, tomorrow morning, of course, bright and early, 9 a.m., we're going to start back here on stage, where we have many more highlights waiting for you, including the Foreign Minister of India. He's going to come. Very interesting perspective, I'm sure he's going to bring. We have Kersti Kaljulaid, we have Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, and so forth. So with that, thank you, Prime Ministers. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you to all for your attention, and see you back here at the dinner or back here tomorrow morning. Thank you so much.